Hi, so this is the introductory lesson on poetry. How this will work is we will teach about poetry, you will practice reading poems and answering questions, and then you will also get to read some more poems and you will be analyzing poetry based on what you learn. So, first, we're going to talk about all the elements of poetry. So, let's get started. Poetry is fun, interesting, and a different way to communicate feelings and ideas. Poems are imaginary gardens with real toads in them. A poem is an imaginary garden because it is a creation of the poet's imagination, and because it also comes from the poet's experiences in real life. It has real toads too. That's from Marianne Moore on how to write a poem. Poetry is everywhere. It can be even in jump rope chants, TV commercials, and songs, which we will analyze a song. Poetry can come in different shapes and sizes. Like this kite poem is a type of concrete poem, shape poem like this rainbow poem, and they can rhyme or they don't have to rhyme. Like math, easy, fun, multiply, factor, subtract. I like doing math. Great. See, that's not a rhyming poem, but it's still a poem. Poems can be on any topic, mood, or feeling, and it's an expression of that feeling in a poem. So that's what makes poetry so different. And if you notice, it's not written in paragraphs, and we'll talk about how it's written in a different video. I made myself a snowball, as perfect as could be. I thought I'd keep it as a pet and let it sleep with me. I made it some pajamas and a pillow for its head. Then last night it ran away, but first it wet the bed. I thought that one was a funny, humorous poem. That is a feeling of humor. You can have feelings on friendship and feelings about nature. This humorous poem was also a rhyming poem. It rhymed at the end of some of the lines, not all of the lines. So, how to read a poem. In order to write a poem that others will enjoy reading, you have to strengthen your poetic ear. To strengthen your poetic ear, you must read and write lots of poetry. So, by reading a poem, you read the poem carefully all the way through. Read the poem aloud. This is very important to help you hear the rhythm of the poem. Pay attention to punctuation. If there's no punctuation at the end of the line, read through it to the next line, just like a sentence is a story. Listen as you read. Here is the poems for us to practice. Now, these are 3 different limericks. Limericks are 5 lines. And after we go through the elements of poetry, we're going to learn about different types of poems, and you'll get a chance to read. I also want to say that this will be in a PDF, this video slideshow, so you can see everything that you've learned here again on your own if you want to go back and use one of these poems to analyze yourself. 3 limericks. A young man with wobbly eyes used to muddle his G's and his Y's. When he said guess, I guess he meant yes, and yugs was how he said guys. Here's another one. There was a young man with a pimple who said everything in life is simple. For weeks and weeks he sucked in his cheeks, and now his pimple's a dimple. There was an old man from Crewe who wanted to know how to moo. He studied a cow to try to learn how, but all he could do was boo. Then I see you dancing, father. No sooner downstairs after the night's rest and in the door than you started to dance a step in the middle of the kitchen floor. And as you danced, you whistled, you made your own music, always in tune with yourself. Well, nearly always anyway. You're buried now in Lislochton Abbey, and whenever I think of you, I go back beyond the old man, mind and body broken, to find the unbroken man. It is the moment before the dance begins, your lips are enjoying themselves, whistling in air, whatever happens or cannot happen, in the time I have to spare. I see you dancing, father. Now, this is a poem to show that sometimes poems mean different things, and he's talking about his father, and his whistling might mean he's happy. It might, and then to find the unbroken man, like someone who's not happy, but when his mind is broken, maybe he's unhappy or he's getting sick. So things can have different meanings in poems, and sometimes you have to read them more than once to even understand a little bit of what it means. This poem was written during invasion in Iraq in 2003. Playground. Dark brown eyes, scanning dusty tarmac, a boy on a swing, head down, mouth humming, a boy swinging intensely. Before dusk he must go to his grandmother's house on the edge of the city, alone on a swing, thinking on a swing, a boy. His mother will stay home, she won't go to the shelter. People here are afraid of shelters, they remember last time. The chains of the swing, they clank, they creak, the boy's head feels with explosions. A boy on a swing. Notice there's no punctuation on this one, no capitalization, and poets write these without punctuations for a reason, and the break in between the lines is where you might pause if there's no punctuation. But I did want to show you different types of poems and how they can be funny, they can be serious, they can be about friendship, they can be about lots of different things. Now I'm going to go through a couple of definitions that you'll need to know for this unit, and we're going to talk more in depth about things on other videos, but you can always come back to this PDF, and we're even going to have a Quizlet for you to practice some terms that you're going to have on a test when we come back from this remote learning. So here are lots of different figurative language that we're going to talk about. Alliteration is the repetition of the beginning sound of a letter in 2 or more words in a line. Verse like dappled doggies dash or bouncing bunnies. Careening cars crashing. Those have the same hard C sounds. Careening cars crashing. So that's the alliteration. Think like Sally sold seashells by the seashore. The repeated S is alliteration, and it gives it a rhythm, which you often will find rhythm in poems. There's some other types of rhythm. Also, we'll be talking about end rhyme. When there's a rhyming words at the end of 2 or more lines that we've seen before, like often nursery rhymes. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. So wall and fall rhyme. That's an end rhyme. There can be internal rhyme, which is rhyming words within a line. For example, Jack Sprat could eat no fat. So sprat and fat rhyme, and they're in the same line. So sometimes you'll see rhyme inside a poem. Again, both of these things, rhyme, alliteration, give it the poem a rhythm. A metaphor is comparing 2 different things without using like or as. It's very similar to a simile. You'll often see metaphors in poems because they have, like we talked about, a deeper meaning. And meaner, you'll learn more about in the upper grades. But if you would like to pause the video or go back and look at the PDF and learn about some of these other definitions in poems, you can. Onomatopoeia, I know you've heard about before, a word that mimics the sound it repeats, like buzz. And we also heard some on the poems from before. Clanging was on the swing poem. And repetition is another way to have rhythm. Repeating a word, phrase, or sounds to add emphasis of rhythm. Probably the best example of repetition would be the lines from Edgar Allan's Poe's poem, The Raven. While I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of gently rapping at my chamber door. So anytime a word repeats, or sometimes a whole line or a whole phrase will repeat, that gives it a rhythm. And again, we've talked about rhyme. Rhyme scheme, you'll learn about how different lines, like it might be every other line rhymes. That's called a rhyme scheme. And each line is lettered, and we're going to talk a whole video about rhyming. So look forward to that. Simile is the comparing 2 different things using words like or as, like I'm as hungry as a bear. And then the next part of the poetry that you'll learn about is stanzas, which is the division or a section of poem named for the quantity of lines it has. So a couplet is a 2-line stanza, a triplet has 3 lines, and a quatrain has 4 lines. And then you can also have more than just 2, 3, or 4 in a Stanza. Think of stanza as another way to say paragraphs in poems, because paragraphs are usually based on a topic and they are made of sentences. Stanzas in poems are not made of sentences always, because poetry does not have to follow punctuation rules. And then last, a verse. A verse is a line of poetry. So stanzas are made of verses, which are lines. And how many lines it has all depends on what the poet decides. Now, I would love for you to read more poems, and we're going to put a link to poetryforkids.com. Here are some great poems that you might want to go look at first, and to get you ready for listening and hearing more poems and practice reading it out loud and looking for those things that we talked about. And your next video will be focusing more on elements of poetry, what all poems have, like stanzas, lines, and most poems have rhyming or repetition. And we'll also be watching a video where you're going to hear poems, and then we'll ask you questions, and you can think about your response and see if, once we talk about the answer, if you get the right answer. So look forward to those videos.